afternoon and thank you for joining us on Future TV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri condemns Hezbollah's bomb attack on an Israeli army post in South Lebanon, saying it is unacceptable. Relatives of captive security personnel held by jihadist militants reopened the vital Dahr al-Baydar highway as Health Minister Wael Abu Faour assures them the negotiations are ongoing and productive. At least 12 Kurdish protesters are killed in Turkey following clashes with the police over the government's inaction against ISIL. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri says Hezbollah's latest operation against Israel in the border area of Sheba was unacceptable. Hezbollah claimed responsibility for planting a bomb that wounded 2 Israeli soldiers in Sheba 2 days after a Lebanese soldier was wounded by Israeli fire in the same area. Hariri said Hezbollah cannot make a unilateral decision to exclude the Lebanese government from such operations. He said national partnership was necessary so as not to implicate Lebanon in the wars of others on our land or in the wars on others' territory. The UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon has launched an investigation into the shooting of a Lebanese soldier, saying the incident violated Resolution 1701, which brought an end to the Israeli conflict in 2006. The UN interim force in Lebanon released a statement saying both Israel and Lebanon are coordinating with UNIFIL to prevent further incidences. The shooting incident, where Israeli soldiers fired at Lebanese army post wounding 1 Lebanese soldier, took place in the Sheba farms in the south of Lebanon on Sunday. The soldier Zakaria Hamza al-Masri was shot in the hand, prompting the Lebanese army to return fire. Relatives of captive security personnel held by jihadist militants have reopened the vital Dahr al-Baydar highway linking Beirut and Mount Lebanon with the Bekaa Valley after receiving assurances that the government was ready to discuss a swap deal to end their son's ordeal. Speaking after a meeting with the families of the captives at their protest campsite in Dahr al-Baydar, Health Minister Wael Abu Faour assured that the government was eyeing productive talks to clarify terms of an ongoing deal to release the hostages. The minister pointed out that he had briefed the captives' relatives about progress in the file, stressing that the Qatari mediation is still ongoing. The relatives of the soldiers and policemen held hostage by militants from Syria's Nusra Front and ISIS have been blocking the main artery of Dahr al-Baydar since September 24th to press the government into negotiating for the captives' release. A statement by the relatives said they've decided to move the protest to Riyadh Solah Square in Beirut. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri says he stands side by side with former Prime Minister Saad Hariri against holding parliamentary elections before presidential vote. During his weekly meeting with legislators in Ain Tine, the Amal leader said he supports arranging polls, but not if a major party refuses to participate. Future Movement leader Saad Hariri stated after his meeting with French President François Hollande that his party will not participate in parliamentary elections if they're held in the absence of a new president. Separately, Berri downplayed Hezbollah's attack on an Israeli patrol in Sheba, saying he is more concerned about routine Israeli violations in Lebanon. British Ambassador to Lebanon, Mr. Tom Fletcher, says Britain has increased support for the Lebanese army to confront the extremist threat on its eastern border. Following a meeting with Prime Minister Tamam Slam at the Grand Sarai, Fletcher said Britain will also equip the army's 3rd Border Regiment in the hopes that Lebanon will be able to fully control its border and prevent more confrontations.
I've just updated Prime Minister Salam on a further expansion of Britain's support to Lebanese and Lebanon's resilience. We understand the threats on the Syrian border, and so as part of this ongoing work and as an expansion of this work, we now intend to train and equip a 3rd Lebanese land border regiment. We hope that this will allow Lebanon to take full control of its border and to keep this war out. Secondly, we recognise that the battle against extremism cannot be won by force alone. So we plan now to create job opportunities to help municipalities to deliver better services. We will continue with our biggest ever humanitarian effort to help refugees from Syria live with dignity and prepare to go home and rebuild their country again. This is the second year that we are providing textbooks in all Lebanese state schools, reaching over 300,000 pupils. But we will now go further, providing over $50 million to the Lebanese education sector. Over 30 million of this support will go through the World Bank Trust Fund. We believe in Lebanon's potential, and we are determined to help hard-working families across the country give Lebanese youth the education they need to build the Lebanon that they deserve. We also discussed this morning, of course, the presidential vacuum. We long to have a president to work with. It pains me to drive past Babda Palace every morning and to know that it remains empty. And it should pain the Lebanese people too. Because every day without a president is a missed opportunity. Every day of vacancy is a day when the forces destabilizing the country become stronger. And every day without a presidential voice makes it harder for us to help Lebanon. We must not underestimate the challenges facing Lebanon. We must not underestimate the courage required to meet them. We will stand beside the Lebanese state to show terrorists that they will find no haven here. Daesh is a threat to all of us, so let us all face it together. No one should underestimate the resilience of the Lebanese people, nor should they underestimate the commitment of Lebanon's allies.
A sixth-grade Lebanese boy came in first place in an international junior mental calculation competition in Germany, beating dozens of participants from more than 40 countries. 11-year-old Mohammed Almir received a record score of 1,400 over 1,500 in the 2-hour final test, outpacing by 300 points the second-place competitor in the annual Junior Mental Calculation World Championship. Family and friends of the boy celebrated his poor neighborhood of Haya Bisamra in Tripoli, North Lebanon, upon his return from the 3-day contest in which he earned the title World Junior Genius. It was not the first time that Mir participated in a brain teaser challenge. His first competition was in 2012 in Lebanon, in which he figured among the 20 finalists for first place. He also won a trip to Japan in 2013 to take part in a training camp on mental calculation. Fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant Group have reportedly withdrawn from some parts of the embattled Syrian city of Kobani overnight after airstrikes by a U.S.-led coalition. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says fierce clashes were underway in the east of Kobani, also known as Ain al-Arab, after the Islamic State launched an offensive to retake the areas it lost control of. At least 3 fighters from the Kurdish People's Protection Units were reportedly killed in the fighting, along with an unspecified number of ISIL jihadists. Meanwhile, the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, has called for urgent international action to stop ISIL from taking over Kobani.
The world has seen with his own eyes the images of what happens when a city in Syria or in Iraq is overtaken by the terrorist group called ISIS or Daesh. Massacres, humanitarian tragedies, rapes, horrific violence. The city of Kobani, on the northern border of Syria, close to Turkey, has been under siege now for 3 weeks. There were 400,000 inhabitants. They've been defending themselves. They're all Kurds. They've been defending themselves with great courage. But they are now very close to not being able to do so. They're fighting with normal weapons, whereas the ISIS has got tanks and mortars. The international community needs to defend them. The international community cannot sustain another city falling under ISIS. Turkey has been very generous in receiving more than 200,000 of its inhabitants. But what is needed now is concrete action. The world, all of us, will regret deeply if ISIS is able to take over a city which has defended itself with courage but is close to not be able to do so. We need to act now.
Coming up next, Twitter is suing the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice to allow it to disclose more about its demands for user data. More details after the break. Welcome back. At least 12 people have been killed in demonstrations across Turkey after clashes broke out between Kurdish protesters and the police. Kurds took to the streets to demand more action by the Turkish government to protect the area surrounding Kobani, the Syrian Kurdish town that has been under fierce attacks from the Islamic State. This comes after President Tayyip Erdogan said the town was about to fall into the hands of the extremist jihadist group. Clashes between demonstrators and police mainly erupted in Istanbul and in the capital, Ankara. Protests also took place in Europe, with around 60 Kurdish protesters making their way into the European Parliament building. And now for some news around the world. In brief, Palestinian demonstrators have clashed with Israeli police at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem, leaving 3 officers lightly injured. Palestinians were blocked from entering the mosque by Israeli police, who then escorted members of a right-wing Jewish group into the mosque to observe a Jewish holiday. Canada has become the latest country to join the U.S.-led coalition against the Islamic State after a vote in the Canadian Parliament. The motion passed with 157 to 134 votes and authorizes airstrikes in Iraq for up to 6 months. It also explicitly states that no ground troops can be used in combat operations. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta became the first sitting president to appear before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where he faces charges of crimes against humanity. The court had ordered Kenyatta to attend the status hearing today, denying his request that he participate by video. Twitter is suing the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice to allow it to disclose more about its demands for user data, saying that its free speech rights are being violated by restrictions. In a lawsuit filed in California, Twitter argued that the current rules prevent it from even stating that it has not received any national security requests for user information. Twitter's Vice President Benjamin Lee said that FBI and the Department of Justice had refused Twitter to publish any specific numbers on data requests, other than the broad ranges agreed upon with several other firms. Earlier this year, 5 major companies, including Apple, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, and LinkedIn, reached a settlement that allowed them to disclose some level of information in biannual transparency reports. But Twitter argued that such limits are unconstitutional. Twitter, which allows its 271 million monthly users to send 140-character text messages, has traditionally taken an aggressive posture challenging government censorship requests and has previously described itself as the free speech wing of the Free Speech Party. And on that note, we end our bulletin for today. Now let me remind you of our headlines. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri condemns Hezbollah's bomb attack on an Israeli army post in South Lebanon, saying it is unacceptable. Relatives of captive security personnel held by jihadist militants reopened the vital Dahr al-Baydar highway as Health Minister Wala Boufawur assures them the negotiations to release the hostages are ongoing and productive. And at least 12 Kurdish protesters are killed in Turkey following clashes with the police over the government's inaction against ISIL. Those are your Wednesday headlines from us here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.